So, good evening, everyone. Let's bow in. And welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakenings course. We've been working our way through the introductory material and now the appendices. For Shantideva is the Bodhisattva, the way of the Bodhisattva, the translation by the Padmakara Translation Group. And tonight we're going to go through the Appendix 2 and Appendix 3. Appendix 1 is the life of Shantideva, and we just suggest you read it. It's informative. I lived in the 8th century and had an interesting life, to say the least. There are different versions of it. And the one in the appendix is by a very famous Buddhist historian from, I think, around the 12th or 13th century named Putun. And you can read that. And then we're going to be talking about the Appendix 2 and 3 tonight. And Michael is going to lead off.
Okay, so a lot of what we're going to be reading about in this text altogether are ways in which the Mahayana challenges different ways that we conventionally think and ordinarily think. And that's really true of the two appendices that involve equalizing self and other and exchanging self and other. And this is entirely consistent with what we've read in the past in the seminary compendium, the Profound Treasury. And so for that reason, I'd like to read just an excerpt first from the Bodhisattva Path of Wisdom and Compassion, where the chapter 8, where Chogyam Trungpa talks about cutting ego fixation. He says, ego is an instinct that we share with the animals, but on a slightly more sophisticated level. Instead of barking, we talk. Instead of perching, we sit. But there is not much difference beyond that. Ego is kind of a basic crudeness that exists in us. Usually, it is the very first thought that arises. Whenever there is any challenge, any incomprehension or dismay on a smaller or larger scale, we always think, how am I going to deal with this? We always begin with me. It doesn't have to be the large-scale warfare. Even if it is only a small inconvenience, like running out of hot water or running out of toilet tissue, our first thought is, how am I going to wipe my bottom? How am I going to take my bath? That is the first thought, but it is not particularly the best thought. In fact, it is the worst thought. Whenever the slightest edge occurs in our life, we think of ourselves first. We think me. This does not mean that we should stop taking care of ourselves. The point is to recognize that there is a quality of psychological panic which starts with this, here, me, minus. It starts with apprehension, with bewilderment or confusion, and quite possibly leads us to resort to aggression. When worse comes to worse, that's our only choice, aggression. With that mentality, you see the idea of compassion as a threat to your personal territory. You think, if I follow the Mahayana, well, I have enough freedom. If I give up my privacy and surrender my whole being for the benefit of others, it might be like joining the Salvation Army or even worse. You question how far you're willing to go, and your thought is about how to preserve your own comfort. But once you become involved in the Mahayana path, you should not be thinking about your comfort at all. In the Hinayana, there may be some comfort in the precision of shamatha and vipassana, but in the Mahayana, your own comfort is out of the question. You do not have such a thing as privacy or personal comfort, but you are purely dedicated to the welfare of others. So what we're talking about tonight are practices that will help us develop the kind of compassion that allows us to truly consider the welfare of other beings. And again, as Trungpa Rinpoche says, this doesn't mean that we don't care about ourselves, but rather that we take a wider view, that we open ourselves up. I have to say, I've read this section before and liked it, but forgot how overwhelming it could be. Just the idea of identifying with all sentient beings and the suffering of all sentient beings. It's convenient to forget, but not from the point of view of practice. So it was interesting to read it again and kind of remember, this is what I didn't remember, which was interesting to myself. A lot of times when teachers talk about the fact that compassion is innate, that in developing compassion and developing bodhicitta, we're not doing something, not working with something that's completely absent, that we're working with something that's already present within us, but obscured or buried, or you could say undeveloped in a sense. And a lot of times what teachers will say is one sign of our ability to be compassionate actually lies in our desire to be happy and wanting to avoid suffering, which can come across as kind of a surprise, since if you just were to take that attitude alone, it would be a rather selfish outlook. But the point is that we can actually expand this sense of what it means to be happy ourselves and to want to avoid suffering, to develop empathy for other beings. Because we realize at some point, if we reflect on it and contemplate, that this is what all beings want, that all beings want to be happy, and all beings want to avoid suffering. So this begins in some sense with compassion to ourselves. But from there, we want to expand or cultivate, these feelings that are kind of nascent to begin with. Or as it says in the text, we must vigorously train in ways to protect others as much as ourselves, creating happiness and dispelling suffering. So we're talking about a real training here, a real discipline, a real practice in learning what it means to equalize self and others. And again, that we want to be happy and avoid suffering leads us to develop compassion and empathy for others who we realize want the same thing. And that eventually at some point we can actually extend this sense to all beings. Also, when we contemplate what makes us happy and what brings us suffering, ultimately this leads to some understanding along the Hinayana level about renunciation and contentment, that we come to realize that we're actually quite confused about what actually makes us happy, and we're confused about what brings us suffering, and that we spend a great deal of time pursuing things that at best give us temporary happiness, or worse, involve a great deal of struggle and suffering, and then never actually lead to any real fulfillment at all. We also realize that other beings are greatly confused about what brings happiness and suffering. And in fact, another one of the things that drives compassion in the Mahayana is when we begin to realize how much suffering we create needlessly in our confusion, and realize that beings also create suffering out of their confusion. So the appendix is based on a commentary by Kunze and Paulden, and is based on some verses from chapter 8, Meditative Concentration, or the Meditation Paramita. And it's excerpted actually from another book that the Padmakara translation group translated, called The Nectar of Manjushri Speech. And the reason it's called The Nectar of Manjushri Speech is Manjushri was one of the main deities, bodhisattvas, that Shantideva received teachings from. And it's said that before he actually gave the presentation that became the way of the bodhisattva, that he spent the evening supplicating Manjushri. So Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom, and that's why, or one of the reasons why there's such an emphasis on prajna throughout this text, actually, although it really comes to its fore in chapter 9. But chapter 8, it deals with the meditation paramita, and begins with the importance of developing meditative stability, really developing a mature sense of shamatha vipassana. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that one of the outcomes of meditation paramita was to stabilize thought processes, meaning that we're not thrown by conflicting emotions, and we're able to settle and actually begin to dissolve fixations and let go of reference points, because again, we're able to settle so fully in meditation practice, a stabilizing thought process. So the commentary actually begins with verse 90 in chapter 8, which I will put up for just a moment. So here it is. Compassion makes us feel such pain, you say. So why should we make efforts to engender it? But thinking of the suffering of beings, how can you... wrong one. Strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus be the guardian of all as yourself. So it's with this verse that we begin talking about the practice of equalizing self and other. And he begins by then in the next verse, as it says in the, as it says in the appendix, the hand and limbs are many and distinct, but all are one, the body to be kept and guarded. Likewise, many different beings in their joy and sorrows are like me, all one in wanting happiness. So it's realizing, again, that all beings want to be happy and that all beings want to avoid suffering, that we're working on seeing for ourselves, manifesting for ourselves. And it's said that this equalizing self and other is necessary for doing the practice of exchanging self or other, which is what the second appendix is all about. And basically, what Shantideva presents in the verses that follow are ways to help us understand how notions of I and other are creations of ego, creations of mind, and that there is no real solid ground for saying I and other, that they're imputed or created by mind. This is very much a part of the Madhyamaka reasoning that we talked about last week, that we impute a label onto things by looking at the parts. In the same way that one of the classic Madhyamaka reasonings is what's called the reasoning of a chariot. And the point is to take apart the entire vehicle, wheels, axles, spokes, the carriage, and so on and so forth, and realizing that the label a chariot isn't in any one of those things. And in the same way, the sense of I and the sense of other is are labels created by mind. And as we come to understand this and understand that we generally live in this world of conceptual labels and conceptualizations and begin to let that go, we begin to realize that we can actually loosen up or open up. And that ultimately I and other, as it says in the text, have no fixed solid basis in reality. And so from that point of view, there's no real barrier between self and other, except for what we create conceptually. That's the divide we create. So that's how we begin practicing this. We begin by contemplation to dissolve any kind of localized sense of I. And this is why that chapter begins by pointing out how we can divide the body up into many parts, but it's really all one thing. And in the same way, we can have lots of labels for the billions and trillions of sentient beings, but in one sense, in the sense that all beings want to be happy and that all beings want to avoid suffering, it's all one thing. And if we contemplate this further, we can realize that conceptualizations, in other words, the ways in which we label and divide up the world, has an impact too on how we feel about things. That what we decide is I, what we decide is other, what we feel we want to protect or nurture under the definition of I or me or mine, what we tend to project outward as other, that we generate a great deal of feelings about. And the point here is that we can actually not draw the line at just this localized, centralized sense of I, but expand a sense of I to all beings, what it called the great self in the text, that we can actually consider all sentient beings. There's a PETA poster, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or billboard actually, maybe you've seen, that has cats and dogs and rabbits on one side, and then there's a line, and then it has, and they're labeled pets, and on the other side it has cows, chickens, pigs. On the other side is food that we eat. And the point that they're making is that these are just conceptual designations and that we could actually expand our sense of compassion to other animals. Not that I'm necessarily saying that I do that or that we should, but it's just an idea of how we label things affects how we think and how we feel and how we act. And the whole point here is to begin to dissolve that. As it says in the text, it is the mind that says my body, and that's the basis of this, that we have an idea of a single entity. And from that we expand at the sense of I, me, and mine. But the point is that we can actually expand this sense to consider taking care of others and having compassion for others. And in the verses that follow, Shantideva goes on to talk about different points that people might bring up. How is it possible when others don't feel our pain and we don't feel theirs that we could have compassion for others? And the point is that this comes down to how we think, how we label things, what things we wall off as other, and what things we consider self. And the point is, if we do identify with others, we do feel something of their pain. And the example it gives in the text is the pain that a mother feels when her child suffers. It gives the example of a mother who would rather die than let her child feel sick. Because she identifies with her baby, it says the child's suffering is actually unbearable for her. And the point is that we could actually feel this way about all sentient beings. Again, this is quite challenging and overwhelming. But the point of the text here is this is a possibility that we could consider, that we could let go of this centralized, fixed sense of I that we take care of, and the people that we, that for whatever reason we extend our sense of I, me, or mine to, and instead open that up, let go, dissolve that fixation, and feel compassion for all beings. It points out in the appendix as well as in Shantideva's verses that it doesn't take a long time to habituate ourselves this way. The appendix gives the example of a horse that's being sold. The horse lacks grass or water. This is unbearable or at least difficult for the owner, but the buyer doesn't care unless they really want the horse. But then when the horse is sold, it's the other way around. Now the owner doesn't particularly care unless they have some affection for the horse, but the owner does care. The buyer does care because now it's their horse. So the point is that we have the capacity for feeling this way. We need to expand and open it up. That's the main point here. And the point is that there's no basis in the horse itself for it to be considered this man's horse or that man's horse. It's identified as being this person's or that person's horse according to how it's labeled by thoughts. So again, the point here too is to realize through this contemplation how we conceptualize affects how we think about things and how we feel about things and how we perceive things. And again, just begin to open up or let go of that and not have it so much be based on I, me, and mine, as Trungpa Rinpoche said. In the same way, just to say how easy it is to become habituated or to develop these feelings one way or the other. When we see a movie, we very definitely and very quickly identify with certain characters that we think are good or that we admire or whatever, and other characters that we see as evil or difficult or whatever. And again, it's totally just based on mind. And in a sense, it's illusory. So the point is that, again, that we can begin to see through some of the concepts, some of the ways in which you divide the world up. As it says in the appendix, there's not the slightest reason for saying that the notion of I must be applied to me and not to another. That they're all just relative points of view. The I of myself is other for someone else, and what is other for myself is I for someone else. That it's all based on relative points of view. So again, the point here is to begin to dissolve fixations and open our hearts. That's really what this is about. And again, it doesn't require lengthy training. Again, using the example that Kunzang Palden gives in the appendix. As soon as the horse is seen as theirs, people care for it. The text also brings up the importance of taming the mind, which is really what we entered this section on equalizing self and other at verse 90 in this chapter on meditation. But the first 89 verses are really all about the importance of meditation practice and being able to let go of attachments. And the importance of this is, as it quotes in the appendix, the Lord Buddha said, there's nothing easier to educate than the mind itself once it's set on the right path and steps are taken to subjugate it. On the other hand, he also said there is nothing more difficult to govern than an untrained mind. So in a sense, what we're talking about here is developing compassion once we have tamed the mind through shamatha and vipassana. It's in some ways very similar to what we read about in the Mahamudra text that we had with Tralik, that before actually engaging in Mahamudra practice, we settle the mind first so that we're able to actually be present and look at our present experience rather than being caught up in dreams, hopes, and fears. So that, again, it really emphasizes the importance of training the mind. Shantideva's verses give what the text calls a probative argument for ending suffering of all beings. Since there's not the slightest difference between ourselves and others, what reason could we have for not working for the happiness of others? So again, this is the kind of compassion that arises when we begin to dissolve the artificial barriers, the conceptual barriers, the illusory barriers of I and other. The appendix also talks about some of the potential objections or questions that could come up. It talks about verses 90 through to 96. The objection that I need to protect myself from suffering, but other suffering does not hurt me. This is a difficult section to follow, but basically what it's talking about here is that our efforts to protect ourselves from suffering actually relate to a projection of ourselves into the future. That's illusory. And what it talks about is really what it's talking about here is the kind of mindset or the way that we see things when we're able to simply remain present. And in that case, we see that from moment to moment, the lack of true continuity to a self. So again, this doesn't mean that we don't take care of ourselves. It just means that we don't become excessively involved in protecting ego, developing cocoon in the Shambhala sense. Because we're able to simply remain present with how we are. His point is that future suffering doesn't affect us now. And in the present, there's really nothing to protect. Ultimately, what these last pages are talking about is the beginning of some realization of egolessness, that our efforts to protect ourselves from suffering actually create suffering because they're based on an illusion, the imaginary creation of ego that we go through moment to moment. And it gives some examples even of birth and rebirth here, and talks about how in the extreme sense that as we go from lifetime to lifetime, how really different we could be if we were, for instance, went from the human realm to the hell realm. We'd have a completely different body, so that completely different experience of the world, which hopefully will not happen to any of us, but just again, that the sense of continuity is really a conceptual creation, and that what's really important is simply being present and awake in the present moment. So there are a couple of things in that are not addressed in the appendix about the benefits of doing this practice of equalizing self and other. One being that we're able to actually do the exchange of self and other. But the other actually come up in some other verses, which again I'd like to share. First of all, again, while it could seem really overwhelming to consider I as all sentient beings and think of the horrible, terrible things that are happening every moment in this world, just in the human realm, let alone considering human realms. But one of the arguments that Shantideva makes first is compassion makes us feel such pain, you say, so why should we make efforts to engender it? But thinking of the suffering of beings, how can you regard as smart? How can you regard as great the smart of your compassion? So the point he's making here is whatever we may feel through doing this practice is nothing compared to the actual suffering of beings in all of the realms, really. And even more so, he says, and if through such a single pain a multitude of sorrows can be cured, such pain as this, all loving people strain to foster in themselves and others. So what he's saying here, if through such a single pain a multitude of sorrows can be cured, is comparing that, in the commentary, it said that this is like a wound or like a vaccination or something like that, where through a little bit of pain, a great deal of suffering is avoided. That if we're actually able to actualize equalizing self or other and exchanging self for other, that this brings about amazing, tremendous benefit. And that's why the last thing, the benefit of this, is the ocean-like immensity of joy when arising when all beings will be freed. Will this not be enough? Will this not satisfy? The wish for my own freedom, what is that to me? And the last thing that I'll say about just this section of the reading is when we think about the challenges involved in equalizing self and other, and we think about the immensity of suffering, we think about what it means for ourselves and other beings that we want happiness and want to avoid suffering, and we think about what brings true happiness and true avoidance or true elimination of suffering, that this ultimately provides that motivation that's at the heart of all bodhicitta practice, that we wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, that we realize our capacity as ordinary beings is so limited, and that by developing the wisdom and compassion of a Buddha, that we could benefit so many beings, and that this contemplation and the exchanging of self or other just generates again the tremendous compassion, the tremendous love for beings, and the desire that all beings be free of suffering, that truly fuels that bodhicitta aspiration. May I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So with that, I will turn it over to John to talk about exchanging self for other.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's important to consider, too, that the underlying view that Shantideva has is very radically different from the view of ordinary people, ordinary confused people, or samsaric people, people who are unenlightened. That really what he's conjuring is the world of enlightenment, inhabited by, actually, you could say inhabited by countless beings, but since the very idea of discrete individual beings is a falsity, it's just immense, it's infinite. And in this world, the world of reality, which we unenlightened people don't inhabit, the division between I and other is seen as an error, a falsity, which we all believe in so profoundly, and which brings us immense pain and unhappiness because we're constantly concerned with our own well-being ahead of others. The world that Shantideva is conjuring, describing, is the world of reality, what things really are, in which these divisions between I and other are not real. They're just figures of speech, but not even of any consequence to the people who live with awakened mind. More than that, the compassion that he's describing brings great joy, bliss even, that the path to being concerned about others, ahead of oneself even, is actually the path to true happiness for us. It's just that we're so mired in samsara, confusion, egocentrism, we can't see it. And so he's trying to describe it, to urge us into it. And there are these two aspects at least. One is the falsity of the division between I and other, the fact that I and other are just labels put onto experiences, and they're not real. And as well, the difference between the emotional valence of the world of I and other, which is full of suffering, concern for I, as opposed to the world of enlightenment, in which one is constantly engaged, a part of, melding with other people without any division, because the divisions were false to start with. So the second appendix has to do with, again, is following Kunzang Paldin's The Nectar of Manjushrie's speech, explaining stanzas 140 to 154 of chapter 8. How can one, by a feat of sympathetic imagination, place oneself in the position of others? In doing so, one gains an appreciation of how one appears in their eyes and how and why they feel the way they do. This is the development of compassion, and it is cutting through the false division between I and other. So he starts out in paragraph 140, when you perform the meditation of exchange, take other beings, whether inferiors, superiors, or equals, and this is the three possibilities, that the other beings are superior to you, inferior to you, or equal to you, and consider them as yourself, putting yourself in their position. So the idea is this is an exercise. This is a contemplation. Normally, we just look at other people, and if a person is inferior to us, we feel maybe sorry for them, we feel superior, we feel contempt, who knows what. If a person is superior to us, we might feel envy and all these other feelings that we feel towards people who are superior, and so forth. And he's asking us to cut through that, because it's all a false mental creation based on the false mistake, the fundamental mistake that we are dealing with as Buddhists, that I and other have true existence. So we're putting ourselves in their position, and when you've changed places, meditate without allowing any other thought to come in the way, he says. So you accept the other person's position. He says, put yourself in the position of someone worse off than you, and allow yourself to feel their envy. Then put yourself in the position of someone on the same level as you, and soak yourself in a sense of rivalry and competitiveness. These are the possibilities in samsaric mind. Finally, taking the place of someone better off, allow yourself to feel that so-called superior person's pride and condescension, and perhaps criticism of you. And the idea is that we are exchanging ourselves for others. We're developing tremendous understanding and cutting down the barriers. So the practice of envy, from the point of view of someone less well off, it says, when the text says, you must now systematically generate the antidotes to pride, rivalry, and jealousy, which are like demons that sap one's integrity. Placing yourself in the position of someone contemptible, someone despised by you or by the world or by a particular branch of society, perhaps a beggar or a tramp, or just someone you feel is less than you. Imagine you become that poor person, and that poor person becomes you. Now allow yourself to feel that person's envy. And I challenge you to think of someone you know, someone who you feel is less than you, or who, if you don't feel is less than, who you think they feel is less than you. And you put yourself in their body, in their mind, and feel their feelings of inferiority to you, their feeling of envy, of resentment to you, of jealousy to you, wishing that they had what you have, and perhaps aggression coming out of that jealousy. You can feel it. And when you do, this engenders tremendous understanding and sympathy for you, for them. He says in paragraph 141, looking at you as someone other someone, this other person is looking at you as someone other, someone talented. Think how happy the other person is thinking. Think how happy I must be. The other person that they're looking at you. Think how happy the other person that is less than is looking at you and thinking that you must be very, very happy. We're praised, respected by all and sundry. So this is the contemplation of a person who is looking at you. Perhaps they're seeing you as rich, that you are better off than they, have better clothes, money to spend, are regarded with respect by others, while they are regarded as being a tramp, a beggar, nobody. That they are looking at you and regarding you as being learned, talented, well-disciplined. You and the other person, the envious person, well, he's dismissed, or he or she, as a fool. The wealthy person that is envied enjoys every comfort and happiness. The less envious person, you can step into their shoes. The less than envious person, by contrast, is a pauper. Your mind weighed down with worries, your body racked with disease, suffering, and the discomforts of heat and cold. This envious person has to work like a slave, digging, harvesting grass, while the person that is envied, perhaps me, can sit back with nothing to do. And so the easiest way to do this is to think of someone who you actually feel is unhappy, regards himself as being less than, and perhaps someone who regards you as being superior, more than, having more money, having more friends, having more respect, having more love. And so they're envious of you. And you feel this other person's suffering. In the text it says, he, the person envied, has servants and a private horse on whom he inflicts a great deal of discomfort and suffering. He's not even aware that they are in distress. And there he is, oh, so comfortable. This is the voice of the envious person. And as if that weren't enough, he gets angry and lashes out, whipping and beating the horse and the other people. So put yourself in that envious person's position, and you take on the sufferings that are inflicted by the superior person. You will come to recognize their sorrows. Compassion for them will grow. So, and what we're enjoined to do is to see that envious person is looking at us and to develop compassion for them, to realize that they feel that we are superior, have what they don't want. You might ask the arrogant person what reason he, she has to be so arrogant. After all, people, even people who are low down, like me, the envious person, can be found to have something good about them. And so it goes. You, the envious person, have it in you to acquire all the excellence of training, since you have all the qualities of the utterly pure, Tathagata, Buddha nature, the essence of Buddhahood, implicit in your, the envious person's nature. So again, having split between I and other, the envious person is enjoined to realize that it's a false division. And likewise, the envied person is enjoined to have sympathy. If if the envied person, the superior person, says that the other person is despicable because their discipline and understanding are a disgrace, or that the envious person has no resources and so forth, this is not because the envious person is evil. It is because the afflictions of desire, ignorance, avarice, and so on are so powerful that the envious person is helpless. And so you should retort saying, all right, this is the envious person. If you're such a great and wonderful bodhisattva, you should help me as much as you can. So if you're in the inferior position, this is what you might say to the superior one. If you do help me, I, the envious person, am even prepared to accept punishment from you, harsh words and beating. But the fact is that you, the great bodhisattva, are doing nothing for me, the envious person. You don't even give me a scrap of food or something to drink. So why are you passing yourself off as someone so great? You have no right to look down on me. After all, you are a bodhisattva, but can stand by without the slightest intention of helping and saving me, this poor little wretch. And those like me, who through the power of our evil karma are on our way to the lower realms, like falling into the mouth of a ferocious beast. If you have no compassion, you are yourself guilty of something completely unspeakable. Not only that, but you're always passing yourself off as something wonderful. So this is a dynamic that we're being enjoined to recognize. It says, finally, by appreciating the suffering involved in being a poor and insignificant person, without talents or honor, you come to realize how wrong it is to be arrogant and scornful. It dawns on you how unpleasant it is for someone in a humble position when you are proud and supercilious toward them. You should stop behaving like this and begin to treat people with respect, providing them with sustenance and clothing, and working to help them in practical ways. And what we're going to be coming to is that this is the path of true bliss, true joy, true happiness. And we're being enjoined to see that the separation between self and other is false, and to have great compassion for the other. And the first example of this is someone who regards himself as being poor, less than us, and is envious of us. The second example is of the practice of jealous rivalry from the point of view of an equal. It says, next you, I, should make the exchange of taking the place of someone similar to or slightly better than yourself, myself. Someone, the rival with whom you feel competitive, whether in religious or worldly affairs. And I suggest to you, think of someone with whom you feel rivalry. Someone with whom we all have these people in our lives. The people to whom we feel superior, that was the last one. That poor person who's always sucking up to us and admiring us and wishing they were us. And now we're looking at someone with whom we experience rivalry, competitiveness. And you feel, this is what you feel in your neurosis, that however good he, the rival, is in terms of reputation and wealth, you will be better. You will do better. You will deprive him of whatever respect and possessions he has, whether in religious disputation or even by fighting, and you will make sure that you get them all for yourself. This is the neurosis of rivalry. In every way possible, you will advertise far and wide your own spiritual and material gifts, while hushing up whatever talents your rival has, so that no one will ever see or hear about them. Think of it. I mean, I wonder, I can find these people in my life, and I'm hoping you can too. At the same time, you will cover up whatever faults you have, hiding them from public gaze, while at the same time gossiping about all the shortcomings of your rival. Under the impression that you are beyond reproach, lots of people will congratulate you, while for him it will be just the opposite. They may even say, "Oh, you're so much better than he or she." From now on, you will be the wealthy one, the center of attention. This is what your hope is, your dream. For him, there will be nothing. And you'll gloat. And the penalties that your rival will have to suffer for breaking his or her vows, for misbehaving in worldly life, you will make of them an object of scorn and derision. And in public gatherings, you will make them despicable in the eyes of others, digging out and exposing all their secret sins. By using the spirit of rivalry in this way as an antidote to jealousy, you will come to recognize your own faults in being competitive with others. Then you can stop behaving like this and instead do whatever you can to help your rivals with presents and honors. This is the overcoming of this neurotic rivalry, that you help your former rival to enjoy their success. And now you imagine yourself in the position of someone who's better off than you, who looks down on you with pride and derision. How painful to be derided. It says, hearing everyone talking about the other person's talents, about all the other person's learning, and so on, saying how it sets the other person apart from such an abject individual as me, really can be very painful. At the same time, if you put yourself in the other person's shoes, the person who's admired, it can be a great thrill, that all the praise that's coming to them. It says, if through his own hard work and despite the obstacles he has to contend with, the lesser than person, you, manages to make some headway, the other person who is better off agrees that so long as, no, so sorry, keep getting them mixed up. It says, so long as the lower person, the one who is lower than the better off person, works subserviently according to the instructions of this better off person, then this low down wretch, me, will get no more than the merest necessities of life, food and barely enough clothes to protect him. The other will get all the extras. Every kind of pleasure that this inferior person might have, the other person who is better off will undermine. This is the fault of pride. If you find that you are too proud and condescending and have scorn and contempt for those lower down than yourself, you will be able to look at those who are now behaving arrogantly toward you and think, well, yes, I can see the way they feel that they do. And so you're enjoined to serve those others who regard themselves as superior respectfully and avoid the rivalry. I think that the most helpful way to use this is if you can find in your own life people who regard themselves as less than you, inferior and are unhappy in that way, as people who regard themselves as your rivals in whatever your field of endeavor might be. And how do you feel about that? And how are you going to deal with that? And finally, those people who feel that they are superior to you, who look down on you. So I'll stop there. We could have a discussion. Philip.
Thank you both. So it's hard to consider these practices without thinking about Tonglen, and I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts, both of you, about how these relate. I did look it up and I realized Atisha's teachings were a few hundred years after Shantideva's, but they surely do seem to be of the same flavor, these three.
What do you think, Michael?
I think that's true. I think this is a very specific one, very specific contemplations of exchanging self or other that are meant to get at the fact that, again, some of the ways in which we tend to relate to the world. We'd like to think that we see all people as equal, but the reality is that we have our fixed ideas about ourselves in relation to other people, and this is really challenging us to look at them. So, it's again, really key to looking at, jealousy and pride and competitiveness in particular, in terms of how we relate to people and how we harden ourselves towards some and so on and so forth.
Right, and also it's enjoining us to look at the barriers between us and others. Pride, when we look at someone inferior. Rivalry, when we look at someone who's competitive with us on a more or less equal basis. And feelings of inferiority to others. And these feelings separate us. When we do Tonglen, we're cutting through that. We're taking on the suffering of some other being and we're sending out to them lack of suffering, happiness. So it's interesting, you could do Tonglen for each of these three types of people, and it might be quite challenging and different. To do Tonglen for someone who feels superior to you, for someone who regards you as a rival, or for someone who regards you as their superior and is very unhappy about that. What do you think? I mean, think about this, perhaps there's someone in your life who's close to you who regards themselves as inferior to you and is unhappy about that. And you could do Tonglen for them for that. To try to heal that sorrow.
Could I say something, John?
Please.
I just think it's humorous in a way because the people that we want to admire us are the ones who are higher on the ladder than we are, and we don't want to be admired by people who are lower on the ladder. It's like, you can't really choose the people who are going to have a higher, low opinion of you.
And the ladder is our creation.
Of course. Yeah, if you want to feel good about yourself, you look who's lower than you on the ladder, and if you want to feel bad, you look up.
If you want to duke it out, you find somebody who's at the same rung.
Well, nowadays you can just look at how many people follow you on various social media and use that as your ladder.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where it's like a line in the movie War Games. The only winning move is not to play.
And we're being led to the last chapter, which we're going to do at some point, which is all about egolessness. that the fact that I and other don't exist, that they're the source of all our suffering, the belief in I and other, and they're an enormous mistake. And we're being enjoined to enter a different world, a world in which I and other are just mythic labels and not what's real. And this world is supposedly a world of great happiness for the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Friend.
It seems like this exchanging self and other and equalizing self with other, like it seems to me that it relates to the third mark of existence, and it's like a pre-step towards emptiness. Is that the correct view?
I think so, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
This is still all relative truth. This is all within the realm of words and ideas and instructions to us. It's not absolute truth yet. That'll come in chapter 9 with emptiness, shunyata. These are all techniques. We're being asked to contemplate things that we normally just accept.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, underneath, the reason why these things are possible is because ultimately things are empty. That there is no real definite reality to the way we construct our world. It's arbitrary. It's not, there's no real substance to it. But yeah, that's not fully seen until the, Prajnaparamita. But you can get a sense through this of how you can begin to dissolve, or at least begin to see clearly some of the fixations we have. I mean, it gets me that way when I start thinking about it. I'd love to say, oh, I never do any of these things, but I'd be lying to you. I never think this way. We fall into it. And there's a lot of social reinforcement for it as well. Most people think this way.
I mean, when I prepared for this chapter, I did it by thinking of a person who I feel regards themselves as inferior to me, a person with whom I feel competitive and rivalry, and a person who I feel condescends and looks down to me. And I imagine each of those three people and fit this contemplation into them. They're there, absolutely. You betcha. Trip.
Yeah, this is really this is good stuff. It's interesting. What comes to mind for me is this is this technique and these three, basically putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, has some really practical applications. And I was thinking about the three different relationships. Thinking about a relationship with an individual and an organization, in our case, who we felt like wasn't biting on an opportunity to collaborate. And there was an element of insecurity on our part, like, they're big, we're modest size. And this contemplation comes into play because it stopped me in the middle of a conversation with my partner to think about how they look at their responsibilities as a larger organization and the huge amounts of money in this case that they need to raise, and that we are really probably more of a hassle than a help to support them. And I guess my only point is, it feels like these contemplations can be quite useful, yes, in seeing more clearly, but I also think in acting and communicating more skillfully, because you see the perspective of the other, and if you really do see it, you can adapt and and move forward more skillfully. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not just a up in the sky, but there's some practical use to this, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it raises a lot of challenges. It really does. How to relate to that other person skillfully. That other person who feels inferior to you and resents you for your superiority. How do you deal with that? How do you diffuse that? And maybe, if you wish, develop real friendship. That person who's superior to you feels superior. What do you do with that? The corporation. Yeah, it's really challenging.
I think there's the potential for actually some great things that can emerge out of this practice. Improved relationship and all kinds of opportunities. In this case, it helped us find a totally different approach that was a better fit anyways.
Yeah, and increased awareness of what's going on between you and that other person or organization.
Check it out.
I think just the openness that, as we are able to recognize and let go of, fixed ideas about I and other, just makes for a lot more creative possibility.
Hmm.
Emily?
I had this kind of weird experience today where I was in the bathroom and there's a woman who's on a much lower rung than I am in my organization. She was cleaning her glasses and she said, "Do you wear glasses?" And I said, "Just reading glasses, like from the drugstore." And she said, "Well, isn't it great to be so perfect?" And I said, "Well, I'm not perfect. My eyesight is good." And she said, "No, you're perfect. You're perfect." And I remember thinking, like, where did that come from? And it instantly came to mind because of this topic tonight. And I feel, maybe there's something about the way that I behave towards her. She does kind of drive me a little crazy. And maybe there's a way in which I contributed to her feelings of envy or contempt or something. So it's something for me to think about my part in that as well. I don't know.
Yeah, her aggression that maybe is keyed or created by her feelings of inferiority. That she feels that you're lording your superiority over her. It makes her aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then what can you do to diffuse that or to deal with that?
Or even just to diffuse it in myself. I mean, if I can't do anything about her, how she's feeling, how do I make sure that I'm not contributing to it somehow?
Yeah.
That relationship, Emily, it just seems to be that's the world that we live in is so full of the hierarchy, and it does, I think it really stifles us, where people lower on the rungs cannot come, within an organization, speak up, and I think it's rather tragic, for us as humans to not be able to fully express ourselves, and those that feel they are superior, higher on the rung, are not going to listen to those lower, and it's such an incredible loss of potential, and I break that out of individual potential to collective potential. And it seems that to me that's what we're talking about here. Once that separation breaks down, then the human race is actually has immense possibilities. So I think this stuff is incredibly important, even for our survival.
Following up on what Kurt said, Emily, it's worth pointing out that this woman trusted you enough to choose you to be the person to whom to express your feelings.
Maybe. It's a good point.
Miriam has her hand raised too.
Yeah, I think, when we have those opportunities in real life, to go back to Emily's point, it's possible to dissolve the resentment on the spot. Like if you're able to express empathy to the person who says, oh, it must be nice to be perfect. And, when I hear that, I don't know actually how I would react for sure, but it's like, oh, right away you understand that they see themselves as deficient or missing something. And so, and that I'm just trying to think more along the lines of what happens after that. And, Kurt was saying it could change. Like, let's imagine that the other feels heard in their sense of unfairness, or a sense of inferiority. So now you become the sympathetic or empathic superior who is coming down to their level, right? And from then on, I think that the dynamic could change a lot. And most importantly, they would see you differently as a superior, more like they're equal in a sense. So I really hope to have opportunities like that in real life, because I think it could be quite powerful.
Dan.
Dan, you're muted.
I didn't realize. Yeah, this is great. I mean, what Kurt just brought up just reminded me of something, of a point that I think is important, and it's important to me also just on personal reasons because of my need to be like this. But just how counterculture, Buddhism is. Yeah, it was for the Buddha. It was really countercultural culture. To the whole idea of bodhicitta and the four boundless states, joy, compassion, love, and equanimity, and wanting this for other people as the key to wanting this for other people, but also as the key to diminish our suffering, but diminish through the desire to diminish suffering for other people. And it's it's counterculture because what does all this compassion, sympathetic joy, wish for happiness, loving kindness, and equanimity, what does that do to our competitive, whatever you want to call it, our competitive capitalistic, social status, society? It's very counter competitive. It's counter the ideas that there's it's a zero-sum game, that there's not enough joy and love and happiness to go around, right? As Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, if you want to be happy, help yourself. There's plenty available, right? And it's not just this limited amount of happiness, and it's not this limited amount of joy that's available, or and specifically in mudita joy, these sympathetic joy, the wanting joy for other people as opposed to being competitive with them. John's contemplation John was talking about really brought that up. People you feel are either inferior or superior is not being able to take joy in their joy, right? And responding to them not being able to take joy in your joy because somehow there's only enough joy to go around, right? And it's not available for everyone. you know, and wanting it for others is counter society, you know, because where would we be without the competitiveness and the envy and the, you know, wanting others to lose, you know. So anyway, bodhicitta, it's important. Thank you.
Fred.
Emily's story reminded me of an old story. I don't remember how it goes exactly, of a bodhisattva who's walking and then somebody expresses anger towards them. And he's like, oh, I didn't know people could still do that to me. And, you know, there was a sense of joy to it. That's what that reminded me of.
Miriam.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to to Dan's comments about human nature, and I do agree competitiveness is in part an instinct, and it's based on this notion that there's not enough for everybody. But I do think as well that I don't think we can erase that from our, you know, our inner instincts. I think that people want to achieve, they want to go further ahead, but one thing that is possible is having, you know, the competitiveness, but also the greater good in mind. And they're not incompatible. You have to make them compatible to the individual, because you tell someone, look, you know, you can move forward in this company, but whatever you achieve has to also benefit the company itself. We have to know that no one's going to be fired because of this, and that you're bringing to, you know, the corporate well-being somehow. Like, so, because if we pit this, you know, compassion versus competitiveness as opposites that can't be reconciled, we're going to be in a battle forever. So I think it's really about framing it, let's say, within societal's structures. I see that as one possible way out.
You mean it's possible to take joy in your accomplishments, but also take joy in other people's accomplishments?
Or to make sure that your accomplishments aren't coming at the expense of anyone else within your organization, and that your accomplishments produce a gain for the corporation that you're working for. So within a company, I think you could have something put in place kind of like that. It might not work in all systems, but at least individuals can be made more aware of how they're benefiting their own goals can also benefit others. And if you gave them a choice between being selfish versus helping others as well, people want to help usually too. Like, so somehow making it as feasible to accomplish both.
I think you're right. And a lot of it comes down to the skillfulness of people who have some kind of leadership position. I mean, even a teacher in a classroom can do things that support or harm based on how competitiveness in particular is worked with. I think it's also interesting, as Dan was saying, that these apparently are problems or issues that go back hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. It takes on certain modern forms, but
this was the story of the Buddha's life, you know. I mean, his father was extremely disappointed when he wanted to go out and help people, as opposed to, you know, being the leader of the army and the general, the king, you know. of all that stuff, right?
Oh, it was prophesied to become a world ruler.
Right. Or
Yeah,
either a world ruler or a totally enlightened person. And
ended up being both, but Mark?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I was thinking I had some trouble this weekend. I work in a park, and that may not be a person who's particularly powerful or anyway, there's a little cabin I'm in, and we have porta johns. That's gonna sound, we're really going to the dregs here on this story. We have porta johns and we have indoor bathrooms. And I kind of try to focus getting people to the porta johns because I'm in the building, and with my health history, I just feel very vulnerable. And so I try to kind of keep the place from the public unless it's somebody who's has difficulty walking or is otherwise disabled, or for a mother with children. So it kind of cuts down on the amount of people that come in. And I had this woman come up to me, and she just comes running right up to me, and she wants to come into the building. And I wasn't particularly honest with her. I just told her that, I mean, it was true. The place was a mess, and I had all my stuff out, and I had just had lunch in there. And I said, well, how about in a half hour? And she didn't, this just doesn't. And then she goes, why won't you let me in? And I said, well, I have my stuff out, and, I have, my valuables out, and the place is kind of a mess. And she was just so angry. She goes, the other man lets me right in. And I said, I'm sorry. I just, and she finally walks away, but she's really angry. And, just thinking, how do I change that up and make that? I have to be humble enough to tell her that I have certain health issues so that she could at least understand. I don't really like talking about it. And anyway, so I was just thinking now that, I really have to be more honest when I'm talking to people about it, and just explain to them that I have certain vulnerabilities, and give her a chance to have, to at least hear that, the reason. I don't know. My avoiding telling her what my actual reason is not honest, and I have to kind of open up. Anyway, that's it.
So are you in the position of less than, equal to, or greater than?
She just didn't have all the information for why she was not being let in, really. She was actually, I told my mother this story, and she liked her. I said to her that she couldn't go in because my papers are out. She goes, so what, all your papers are in the bathroom? Where do you keep them in the bathroom? And again, it's a cabin, but the bathroom is like right there. Everything's right there. It's not, yes, there's a wall and there's a door, but in essence, everything's right there. And I eat right in the middle foyer, in the middle area, and the bathroom's right to the right. And, I guess I could be less neurotic about it and just let her in, but I thought maybe at least she might understand. I use porta johns all the time. I think they're perfectly safe. Every time you open the door, it's better, it's safer for the public as far as COVID and that sort of thing. But anyway, I don't know if that gives you a better picture of it. But anyway.
Henry.
Well, out of time, by the way.
Oh, well, I don't know if this will take too long. Mark, I actually was thinking that you're bringing up a good point about this, because there is the question, it's a realistic question about boundaries and proper discernment versus being that open. because I do find that kind of depending on location, there are certain places where people already behave this way. It's just in their culture. And then you can go to a different state and it's super neurotic, competitive. All of that exists still, but it doesn't exist everywhere. It really depends. And I've gone back and forth all over the place. And I remember one problem that I was having is I really had to develop discernment because I could be way too open in the wrong environments, practicing being heart open. And it's a real problem for a lot of people, knowing where that line is.
Thank
I just,
you.
yeah.
I just don't know how to, I'm not sure if the results would have been different if I did risk it and tell her my situation. But I get you. I know it's true. I want some privacy for myself. It's true. I don't want to tell everybody, what my doctor tells me. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, it's
But,
nuanced. I
yeah.
don't have the answer to it. Sometimes it can be something neurotic, and sometimes it can be, maybe we have a boundary there for a reason that we have to explore further and see what that's about.
Thanks.
It's an interesting situation because she might have felt lesser relative to you, or you might have felt lesser relative to her. It's depending on what all's in play. But it might be an interesting thing just to do a moment of exchanging self for other and see how it feels for yourself. I mean,
I'm not being totally honest either. And now that I think of it, I do have a bit of, it really bothers me. And this is something maybe everybody here can relate to. I really don't mind porta-johns. I know they're an otherworldly experience and not in a good way sometimes. But some people really do not, under any circumstance, want to use the outdoor bathrooms. They feel it's just not a good experience for them. And I guess it kind of bothers me a little bit that, again, I do generally make exceptions, and especially for people, poor gait and this and that, but otherwise I just kind of find it a little, it's like, what's the problem? I'm so happy when I'm out in the park and there is a porta-john for me to relieve myself. So we're really getting down to, now I'm really sharing too much.
No.
Anyway. So,
well, we're at time.
what a great ending.
You can see the closing chants.
Saved by the bell.
Right. I'll put them up on the screen. And who's leading? Meg and Kurt? Yeah.
It'll just be Meg, but I'm good. I'm here.
Okay.
Let's see. We'll close with a prayer for peace, and then we'll dedicate the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Meg, I had to mute you. I'm sorry. I muted everybody. So just unmute.
By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. It's
Thanks,
really
everybody.
good.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Good night.
everyone.
Well,
Take care.
Good night.
Thanks,
Right.
Night, Mark.
Thank you. Good night.
Everyone.
Thanks, Michael and John,
Thank you.
especially.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.